afternoon. Today's question, scenario actually it is. Now, I've gone through the process to get my child diagnosed. I'm not quite content with the diagnosis I've received. I don't feel it fits my child. But the people who have diagnosed are saying this is it. What legal rights or what can I do legally in regards to this situation?
Okay. There are two ways of getting a diagnosis. And if we're talking about, first of all, let's talk about autism, the spectrum. There are two ways to get a diagnosis. One is through a one practitioner model, and that practitioner would either be a pediatrician or a psychologist. That's an acceptable way in Australia. And the second way is a multidisciplinary diagnosis, and that would involve a pediatrician, a psychologist, an OT, and on occasions, some do, some don't, a speech therapist. And all would have to agree on that diagnosis for it to be formally presented as a diagnosis. Now, what you're often not told is that if you go down the one practitioner way of diagnosing, NDIS doesn't accept that diagnosis. The Department of Education doesn't accept that kind of diagnosis, and other societal systems also don't. So even though it's a valid way to become get that diagnosis, you're going to have to go back and get a psychologist, etc., etc. Now, for ADHD, that diagnosis can be a singular professional, a psychologist, and once that's written up, the way to go about it is really difficult. You were going to say something?
No, my question was that one person for the ADHD, psychologist, psychiatrist, whichever you choose to use, right?
Psychiatrists are more for adults. Psychologists are for younger people.
Awesome. Now that within that ADHD diagnosis, there are multiple appointments with this one person who diagnoses with different stages still for ADHD, right? Like the cognitive assessment, education assessment.
Yeah, look, there's a...
But it's just the one person who does all of them, whereas the multidiscipline are different people for the autism.
Different aspects of the diagnosis for autism. So...
is there... Now I'm just throwing out questions that might be asked. Is there... can we do the ADHD and autism diagnosis together? Or are they two separate?
No, they're two separate diagnoses. So,
so it can be quite a lengthy process, can't it?
Absolutely. You may have heard the term being used, or the letters AUDHD, where the autism ADHD coexistence is put into one kind of label. There's still two different diagnoses.
Right, yep.
It is a difficult one. So if you don't agree with the ADHD diagnosis, your comeback, apart from perhaps trying to go to another psychologist and getting them to look at it, the other one is if you have a complaint, you can put in a complaint to the psychologist board, and off the top of my head I'd have to look it up. But there's a governing body for psychologists. So you can still lodge complaints to the governing body of psychologists. You can go to an ombudsman, you can go to a medical complaints. There are things you can do. But they will be a long process. It will be a long process.
And it's like when my daughter got diagnosed, for instance, the psychologist saw her over a few sessions, right? One of her sessions, she wasn't having a great day, and she had a great psychologist. And when she said to me, well, that's a different child. I haven't seen that child through the rest. So sometimes, like, would it play an impact on the way your child presents to people in that situation to what you see at home? Does that change the way a diagnosis can be done?
Look, you would hope that a diagnosis using the standardised assessment tools would be able to cut through that. However, that's the theory. This is why, look, psychologists can do the diagnosis without really knowing your child. So they may have a couple of sessions getting to know them and then do the diagnosis. It's always better for a diagnosis to be run by a psychologist who knows your young person, who's been going to sessions with them, because they bring then that background wealth of knowledge. Now, when any diagnosis has happened, the first meeting, the first part of the assessment is actually a meeting with the parent or carer where they get a lot of background information. That part is really important because it's about getting to know your child holistically, so you can talk about those different days, you can talk about different moods, different traumas, different experiences. That's what that first session's about. And then you go into the assessment, and then you go after that, the writing of the report, and then a feedback with you and the psychologist feeding back the results, reading back through the report with you. There isn't a fail-safe way to do this. I have read reports where having known the child, and I'm not entitled to run those reports, so I can only do it as a person who has quite a bit of experience in this area. I read some reports where I think, I don't know what went wrong here, but this is not the child I know. Then I've read other reports where I think, wow, this has captured this young person really well. Why it happens? We're humans, and humans are messy. And as much as there are standards and guidelines, etc., to get it right, things aren't always gotten right.
So if we go back to ASD diagnosis, what if, we're talking about the disciplinary way of multidisciplinary, what if two of the three are suggesting one thing and the third is disagreeing? What happens then?
They don't work just in individual ways. They'll come together, and if there is some questions, what they may do is ask you to bring your child in. They will actually sit behind a mirrored wall, a one-way mirror wall, and they will do observations together. They'll go further. They'll work that out, and they do it professionally. There are, it wouldn't be a one-off and unique. You would want that robust discussion. We want to get this right. I know one young person where two people, two of the practitioners agreed and a third didn't. And they did do that behind the mirror then where they were watching, and the person who didn't agree thought, wow, I'm watching something very different here. On another occasion with another young person, one of the practitioners went and observed in school and got additional information that way to complete the assessment. The professionals have ways of working with this. They aren't there not caring. They're not there dismissing. They are trying to do the best they can and the most effective and genuine way, but sometimes things do go wrong, but they do try.
Well, this is getting a bit lengthy. So what happens if, as a young child is diagnosed, say, level 1, 3-4 years down the track, you're going, this diagnosis does not fit my child anymore? What happens then? like level wise, it doesn't fit my child.
This level stuff drives me crazy. The levels are only put in place for the purposes of political decisions. They're put in place so that NDIS has a criteria of who they will give funding to and who they won't. Education department, look at it to see if level 1 means supplementary, level 2 substantial, level 3 extensive. They're put there for a funding reason. It has got nothing to do with your child and their needs. The ASD is not a linear spectrum, it's a sphere, and everybody fits in different places. Level 1, level 2, level 3, all those people have different needs and different needs to be met in different places according to the criteria that the DSM-5 has listed, and everyone will be in different places. The levels are only for funding. If you're not happy with a level 1, go back to the originating psychologist or a new one and say, have a look at this again. Would you agree that this is still an appropriate level for my young person? NDIS needs it. Have a look at it. I just want it to be valid.
So, in summarising, legally, you have options. You don't have to take the original diagnosis if you think it doesn't fit your child.
Yes.
There are legal rights.
There are legal rights.
Thank you for the information.
You're welcome.